This is International Arrivals.
Welcome.
You have arrived at your destination.
I'm Emily Lutzker.
And I'm Anna Kamasia. Today, International Arrivals speaks with interdisciplinary Palestinian-Canadian artist and activist Rana Nazzal Hamadeh, who is based in both Canada and Palestine. Welcome, Rana. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to see you too, to talk with you today.
So this is a series of podcasts that are focused on the notion of home and belonging. As you know, a concept that is really potent when it comes to Palestine and Palestinians. And so I wondered, how do you personally come to terms with this in sort of your own sense of place and home and the idea of belonging? Like, I mean, literally moving between Palestine and Canada. Can you speak a little to your own sense of home?
Yeah, well, I would say that my sense of home is fluctuating, and it's definitely more articulate and strong as an idea than it is as a reality. By which I mean that, you know, most of my life has been in the absence of home, and it's so easy to point to where home is when you're living in an absence of it. But when you do actually arrive, there's a question of, do I actually feel like I belong? Do I feel like I'm foreign here? And a lot of things do make me feel foreign when I do arrive. So home is this huge dilemma, and it's not, you know, it's something we have seen articulated by so many people across the Palestinian diaspora, across all migrant diasporas, I think. You know, as Palestinians, we're literally pushing against this force that is willing us to, in every way, forget the lands that we're from. And even in Palestine, this force is present and is really powerful. You know, a lot of people think that this severing of belonging for Palestinians is only present in the millions of people who are in the diaspora. But actually, even in Palestine, you know, there's so many policies from the Israeli occupation, but also from, you know, the neoliberal PA policies, Palestinian Authority policies that are extending from the Israeli occupation. All of these things are kind of coming together to remind people that they don't belong or that they shouldn't feel belonging, pushing people away from working on the land, devaluing work on the land, making it difficult to stay on the land, and pushing people into cities, into work that's really severed from the place. And, you know, how can someone feel like they're at home if they don't have the right to move? They don't have the right to live freely. And all of the things that we associate with home, like safety and belonging and wholeness, they're not present when you're living under military, you know, occupation, under all these apparatuses that are trying to make you feel like you don't belong. So this idea of home is like, you don't really feel it when you're in home because of all these things that are happening in our home. And you don't, when you're away, you can really articulate that this is home, but you're not actually there. So you're articulating your belonging as something that's outside of yourself. And that does fracture a person as well.
Yeah, and there's a sense, I think, of belonging associated with nostalgia, and thinking about nostalgia as something that never was or can never be, you know. And I think that comes through in a lot of work by Palestinian artists, is this idea of a longing for something that can never be. So it's both in the past and in the present. And I think that that's kind of an interesting concept of time too, because it does affect a sense of time, belonging in the past or belonging in the future. I don't know, maybe, what do you think about, because I mean, you work in time-based media too, kind of your concept of time in that.
Yeah, I think it goes back to this kind of fracturing. When you were speaking, I was actually thinking about how Edward Said wrote about, I mean, I always think of Said when I think about home and belonging because he wrote so much about this. But when he went back to Palestine after years of being exiled or displaced, he went to all these important sites. And when he got to his home, he couldn't will himself to ask to go inside and to look at the inside of the home. There was a woman there, an Israeli, who was living in the home. He just looked at it from the outside, and he said, I felt satisfied just to look from the outside.
Right.
You know, my my father's also a refugee who hasn't been able to go back to Palestine since 48 when he was 7 years old, except for one day. He went one day and was deported in the same day in the 60s, I think. So he's from this town called Tabariya, which is now completely ethnically cleansed. No Arabs left. He's described it to me in so much detail, and he describes the streets, and he's shown me it on maps, and he tells me he could figure out how to walk to his house if he was just magically put there. There's been so many times where I have the chance to go there and I just haven't. I think that to go there and to be confronted with how foreign it is would just be too difficult. I have this kind of nostalgic image that's stuck in time of what this place is and what it means to us. To be confronted with the reality of it, I think would be really difficult, and it would really rupture my sense of that place as home. So, we talk about how colonization creates these like temporal ruptures, I guess. It traps us in a certain time. For many Palestinians, the time that a lot of us are trapped in is 1948. And a lot of people, when they tell their story, will start from that point, the great catastrophe when most Palestinians were exiled and the state of Israel was created. So it's interesting. Time and space are super connected, and both of them kind of they stretch out and they get smaller.
Right. It makes me think about our big idea of home and those memories that we have of that kind of safety and belonging. Or is the memory stronger than the place itself?
Sometimes. I mean, I think that as Palestinians, we owe a lot of our ideas of home to political movements. There's a political impetus and a social one. I mean, people are asserting home as an act of defiance, not out of necessarily, I feel safe and whole and I belong here. In lieu of those things, we're asserting home, even though this place might just be in a memory for us at this moment. It might be a place that you can't actually go to or see, or it might be a place you live in and you don't feel safe and you don't feel whole, happy, and liberated. So
one thing that struck me was the use of the key, right, as an emblem of that. Maybe you could talk a little bit about keys and how important they are as a symbol.
Yeah, I think that Palestinians have used symbols. I could name like a handful just from this year. The key was a huge symbol after the 1948 exodus, or the forcible expulsion of most of the Palestinian population and the destruction of hundreds of Palestinian towns and villages. The old keys, people left their homes thinking that they would be able to go back in a few days or weeks. And even my father's family held on to things like the key from their home. This was a symbol that emerged really from just the reality. People were holding on to these things. And then, when they were finding themselves in refugee camps months later, years later, generations later now for many, a lot of them will still hold on to the key as a symbol of this home that they left. Even if the home has been destroyed, people still have this idea that this key will let me into my home when I'm able to return. Palestinians create so many symbols like this. And like we were talking, I think these symbols hold like really significant role in tying us, like material symbols to tie us to the defiant act of remembering a place that's being erased from history, of asserting that you belong to this place when you can't be in that space. So there's all these like acts of defiance that are happening. Last year, we were seeing images of the watermelon. This goes back to the 70s and 80s when Palestinian arts and culture was really part of the resistance movements, the anti-colonial resistance movements. And Israel banned, in many areas, Israel bans the raising of the Palestinian flag. So during that time, they began to attack even the colors of the Palestinian flag if painters used red, white, and black and green. So people started painting watermelons. Yeah. So when this story came back up last year during the 2021 uprising, the unity uprising in Palestine. This came forward as a symbol. So there's all these really like potent symbols, and they circulate really quickly. Especially, I think they're circulating more fast in our generation because we're just seeing so much and things are happening, you know.
It kind of makes me think about your own work of Unpictured. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that work, and then we can talk about the links there.
Yeah. So I produced Unpictured in Palestine last year, in 2021, I think. Sorry, no. I produced it this year in 2022.
COVID has done that to all of us.
Exactly.
Just like, was it this year? Was it 3 years ago?
Just a little aside on a practical level, just in your studio practice, I know because now you're in Ottawa and you were in Palestine. Like, so was it easy for you to have a place to work and have a studio in Palestine versus in Canada?
I don't have a real studio in either place. I have been moving so much. I mean, my whole life, even my parents, both, all of us, my whole family, we move like every couple years. So there isn't really a strong sense of studio. I worked on Unpictured for a group exhibit with the Qattan Foundation in Ramallah. And I was able to use I just used our spare room to build it. So I'll explain. It's something that I wish I had a studio for. It was a messy work to create. We had this kind of exhibition theme of looking at salons, which is the living room in Palestinian homes where you would greet guests. They're usually the formal living room. You usually have it kind of curated to greet guests, and people will have things on their walls that kind of explain who they are. A lot of the times it'll be like images of people who you've lost, or of people you idolize, or of symbols of the land, or, you know, family photos, wedding photos, things that you want your guests to see. And they're usually also very formal. I started collecting items. I asked people around me to give me an item from their living room, from their salon. And I collected all these items. I had family photos and wall art and tablecloths, ceramics, things that were embroidered. I eventually also had furniture. I had like a whole couch and side tables, a lot of wood and a lot of foam. My original idea was creating something that could commemorate this collection of items as sort of a time capsule for this moment. This is what a Palestinian salon looks like in this moment. And I realized no matter how many items I collected, I wasn't really getting any closer to really representing anything definitively. I could say that the Palestinian salon looks like this, but there will always be some people who are left out from that representation. I decided instead I wanted to distort these items to a point where you couldn't make out what any of them were. And I looked for a machine. You know, I would watch these YouTube videos where they throw a couch into this machine and it comes out as... I went to, you know, municipality workers and people who worked in recycling and garbage dumps, and I couldn't find a machine that would actually take all of the materials. So what we had to do was separate everything by material. The foam by itself and the wood by itself, the paper by itself. There was a lot of books. And I shredded everything. And I created this giant pile of confetti, just shredded pieces of the living rooms. And, you know, it kind of ended up, it was a very colorful pile. It was enormous. I mean, we had bags bigger than myself just to bring them into the gallery. And that's why I say I wish I had a studio to really work in. You know, I love documentary in the sense that I like work that's rooted in reality. But beyond that, I find that traditional documentary will necessarily leave something out because it will claim to represent something. And I wanted the work, I named it Unpictured because, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. You can't see. I wanted to look at the impossibility of representation. I also was really interested by this idea of not showing. I documented every item before I destroyed it. And some people really wanted to see what the items were. But I just felt that that would completely mute the ability for you to look at the work and then imagine what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So for some people, they looked at it and they said, like, this looks like the rubble of a destroyed home. Like they took that kind of very literal destruction. Some people said this looks like a statement on the fracture of our society, how we're, severed. Someone said it looks like the building blocks, like we have to rebuild something new. So I really like that by putting very little, like of my own description onto it and leaving a lot open, it just opened up so much space for imagination, which I loved. And for me, it was still a time capsule, but I'm sure nobody would look at it automatically and see that.
Yeah. Yeah, I was struck when I saw this work, this kind of idea of concealing something and revealing it, turning something inside out, seeing the stuff that's not there, the stuff that we don't see, and how that somehow is more revealing than the thing itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, people were also interested when they hear the explanation of what the work was. The foam is really dominant, the foam from inside the couches, and they happen to be very multicolored. So the work is like rainbow confetti. It was like just rainbow sponges. Like it's a material that's in every space we're in and we don't see it. It's so interesting to have it become dominant once the pieces are destroyed. And like all the wood from all the wood furniture, which was a lot, it just sunk and it disappeared. It was so small. And you really don't see the wood. So it's interesting how some materials also became really dominant.
And kind of about the impossibility of the document too, to fully render whatever it is, whether it's a person, an idea, a place. I was just curious, kind of a side note of your own salon. So you said that most houses have a salon. So I was curious what you have in yours.
So my home, I got this from my mom. We always have rocks, a lot of, like my mom's living room always has big pieces of rock, of like salt crystals. Every time we would go out into the land, she would collect something. And so her living room would become full. And I definitely followed that. I have, like, even on my desk, a series of postcards by Palestinian artists. I have an evil eye emblem, mosaic. I have a painting of oranges, another symbol, if we want to talk about symbols.
What does the orange represent?
So right after the 1948 catastrophe, the Nakba, the orange was an immediate symbol that came out because of the Jaffa oranges. The oranges along the coast, which was the first area that was taken over by the Israelis, had been cultivated for hundreds, if not thousands of years, cultivated to make this very special strand of Jaffa oranges. And these groves were completely taken over. And now they're sold as, the Jaffa orange was appropriated as a symbol of Israeli state building. And they sell Jaffa oranges around the world today.
Right.
So oranges were the immediate symbol of the loss of land, the loss of connection to this place, and of displacement.
I wondered if you could talk a little bit more in maybe not so much in Unpictured, but in your other work, there's this desire, if you will, to talk about grief and loss. And I think it's there metaphorically in Unpictured, but I think it's there more prominently in other works. And I wondered if you could address that a little bit.
Yeah. I had a body of work called 1/1000th of a dunam. It consisted of a collection of soils. I had soils from a few dozen Palestinian villages and towns that I had just collected. And there was a film called Something From There that played, and a series of photographs. It's interesting when we were talking about people looking at your work and seeing something playful or happy, and then having this really kind of, you have to look at it to really see the grief and the loss underneath. With the collection of soil, it was really interesting. I got to display it in Toronto. The collection of soils, a lot of Palestinians in Toronto were going there and sending photos or posting photos saying, like, look at this beautiful collection of soils and seeing it as this very heartwarming, beautiful thing that we were collecting all these like very different colored soils, looking at how rich they are, how each one kind of looks like a landscape. And for me, the ideas of the soils was really sad and really dystopic. Like this idea that you could be forced to leave a place and then what you have left to show for it is a plastic bag with soil. This whole work, that whole collection of work came out of my father. I told you already, he can't go back to Palestine. And every time I would go, he would ask me for soil. He still has the soil. Like every time I bring him a little bit more, he has soil in a bowl on his living room table in his salon. And you see that a lot in the homes of refugees. It's another symbol. It's a little bit less popular, I think, but a lot of people automatically create a symbol around soil. The film, Something from There, it follows his voice and my mom's voice as they talk about bringing something from there to kind of hold on to this place that you can't go to. It's really interesting. Like the first time I collected soil for my dad, it was from Jerusalem. He wanted soil from Jerusalem. As a Palestinian West Bank citizen, we can't go to Jerusalem freely. So my mom concocted a way for us to go. I won't say more, but we go.
Knowing your mom, I don't think we should ask.
It was really stressful. I was probably 14 or 16. I was a teenager. And we have to go to the Aqsa Mosque. It's, a symbol of Jerusalem. We haven't been before. We go, there's 3 checkpoints to get in, 2 Israeli and 1 Palestinian. And the soldiers are making fun of us and everything is just, there's so much tension. Just to be in Jerusalem is to feel such an intense tension that it really, if you're not used to it, it just strikes you immediately. Yeah. And it hurts. And as a kid, I felt something that I couldn't even understand at the time. We finally get in and I'm bawling by the time we get in. And the place is so crowded and everything's a little bit dirty because there's just so many people. I go to like the only piece of soil I could find and it's just surrounded by people. There's soldiers nearby. The most stressful moment ever. And I collect some soil and I put it in my bag. And then this is the soil that he takes and he has so much, like he has a completely different experience of it. It's so beautiful and so peaceful and so like important to him. And he displays it in a way now that's very ceremonial to him. Like it's just so interesting how this thing can have such a different experience for us. After that, I just automatically started collecting soil. And that collection really started building itself before the idea for the exhibit happened. Yeah.
I keep thinking about Emily Jasser's piece. I can't remember the title right now, but where she asks people what they want her to do in Palestine. So rather than take something, it's what can I do for you? And so she goes to these different places, and some are as simple as get a glass of water from this particular tap. It's the description of what they've asked her to do, and then her doing the action. It's
so interesting looking at that work now because she went to Gaza, which you can't go to now. When I was looking at that work recently, I was struck, like, was this 50 years ago? Like, how could she just go? And I realized actually the closures on movement are really recent. They're just so permanent. The way that Palestine is constantly being restructured and new impediments are being put in place, immediately you begin to feel that this is permanent. And it's actually really young. Like, my father is older than the entire state of Israel, which is so hard to really conceptualize because every little thing that I know about, Palestine feels permanent and it feels like it will never change. So Emily Jasser being able to go just 20 years ago, I think it was in the early 2000s, I think, her work.
Yeah. And I just found the title, Where We Come From, If I Could Do Anything for You Anywhere in Palestine.
Yeah. Beautiful work.
Yeah. That's great. Powerful work.
I was just so struck by that. I think my generation, we don't know what it's like to be able to just, drive to Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
Gaza is a completely fragmented piece of Palestine. A lot of Palestinians in the West Bank have never met someone from Gaza.
Right.
And for the exhibit in the Qattan, we had an artist, Rana come from Gaza. She got a permit, which is quite rare. And a lot of people had never met someone from Gaza in the West Bank. A lot of really simple questions being asked, like, what do the streets look like? What do the cabs look like?
Right.
What do you eat? What's the price of things? Everything is so different.
Yeah, when I curated that show Live in Palestine with your mum, we tried to bring Mohammed Harb, who's from Gaza, and we weren't successful. The other thing that you talk about, that I've seen you talk about, is imagination. And now sort of thinking about you talk about young people and how quickly this has happened and how movement has been not stopped, but restricted in so many ways. I wondered where imagination comes into your thinking.
Yeah, I think that in the same way that there's a settler colonial push to sever people from the land, I think a really big part of that impetus is to sever people from their imagination.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't pursue anything, any different reality if you can't imagine it.
Right.
And colonialism really does just mute the imagination, or this is its goal anyways. And I do feel like in the youngest generations of thinkers, there's a little bit more imagination present. And as we get older, it becomes harder and harder to imagine. And I'm so fascinated by imagining and by imagining different futures because I can't do it. I feel so, I think it could be a lifetime project to imagine a different reality than the one we live in, because I don't find it easy. I get really bogged down by reality. And I know in the logical part of my brain that the systems that we're facing have to be temporary, that every empire falls and things change and power shifts. I know these things like in the way that you can know a text or a formula, but to really feel them is something completely different. And that's why I'm so fascinated. I think we need to like strengthen this imagining muscle and constantly poke holes in the systems that feel like they're impervious and made of concrete, and just really know that everything could change in a moment for the better.
So we won't hold you to this, for forever in the future, but if you could imagine a better utopian situation in the world, what would that look like?
Only the hardest question ever.
Just right now, on Friday morning, what would the dream be?
I think that the dream is a world where people feel equal to each other. Nobody's feeling above or below anyone else, and where people can move and have access to the things that make life thrive. We know that these things are as possible as the reality that we're living in.
Exactly.
Like the reality we're living in, if we were looking at it from space, it just seems impossible. Like, how did we get to a world where wealth is so concentrated? Hierarchies are in everywhere you look, there's these intense hierarchies. And how are minorities, 1% holding power over so many of us? It just doesn't seem realistic, and yet it's our reality. So I think that a reality where everyone is equal and hierarchies are abolished, and prisons and borders are no longer these things that are holding people. I think that it's a realistic future, and I think that the more we see this kind of utopic future as the baseline for what's normal, and we see our reality as something that's not normal and not natural, I think that we'll start to shift towards it. And I mean, we are shifting towards it every day. I mean, we feel like our movements don't work a lot of the time. People put a lot of hope into things and then sometimes it doesn't work. But imagine what world we'd live in if nobody was fighting for anything. We'd be moving really fast in a different direction. So, eventually I do think that the tides will turn.
And I think that your generation is really focused on making change. and for the better. I really do think in all kinds of ways. Maybe we're relying on your generation too much, but I do think that people you talk to who are young are really focused on making change for good.
Yeah. And I'm even feeling like the generation younger than us
Yes.
are so amazing. Like, I guess we're all looking down at the next generation and hoping. I'm sure the liberation will involve all of our generations.
Exactly. We all have to stand up, for what we believe in and what is right. Yeah, it's true.
People get a fatigue, I think, and even a trauma from movement building. Sometimes you're constantly having to fight against a trend that just doesn't make sense. Like for Palestinians, doing advocacy work as Palestinians, you're a lot of the time just asserting that I exist, and
Yes.
asserting that the history that I lived or that my parents lived is real. And it, I think, really does create a lot of trauma for people having to argue something that just seems like it should never have to be argued. It's, why can't I be trusted? Why can't my experience be valued as a real experience?
And it's always talked about as resilience or resistance. And I think those are valid terms, but it doesn't account for, as you say, the fatigue that's involved and the daily grind that's involved in trying to validate your existence.
Yeah, there's so much glorification around this idea of resilience. And resilience is just, okay, I didn't die. Sometimes people will be like, your resilience, your people's resilience is so beautiful. It's like, what choice did they have? They had to. And I get why we create some beauty to it to make it livable, and we create some honor to it, and give people value who sacrifice a lot. I get that. I think it helps in some cases, but we also have to honor that it's really hard. It's really hard. A lot of people, there's definitely some people who are carrying more of a burden than others in the fight for all.
And you need allies, Ultimately, you need people to stand up with you, not just Palestinians living their existence in Palestine.
Yeah, totally. But I think that the more that we stand up together and make it normal to speak about issues like Palestine, if we're talking about here in Turtle Island in the West, I think the more that we make it normal and we stand with each other when someone's under attack, it will shift things. We've already seen a huge shift.
The amount of people that got involved and stood up with Black Lives Matter, I think, shifted people's thinking too.
100%. I mean, the Black liberation movement will lift everyone up. It does lift everyone up. Mm-hmm. And it does make society stronger and safer for everyone. And we also I've noticed really viscerally in Canada that the way Black Canadians and Indigenous people across Turtle Island have spoken about colonialism and racial discrimination, they've elevated everyone's understanding of these things.
Absolutely.
And created so much space for us to be able to talk. I'm able to speak about settler colonialism in Palestine and be understood because Indigenous people here paved the path for that. And they help us understand our situation as well and how to fight it. They've been in this struggle for hundreds of years longer than us.
Yeah, that's nicely put.
I think it's sort of impossible to make art when your life is threatened. And I know that you're both an activist and an artist. And I'd love to hear from you a little bit what the difference is kind of, in your daily life there and how you communicate that, and also what the power is in both.
Mm-hmm. I really like that question. I think in Palestine, when things are functioning as normal, which is a normal that is very violent and repressive, when things are functioning as normal, it's really impossible for me to create art or to really reflect on anything. Things happen back to back. You wake up to terrible news every 2 days and you feel really trapped and nothing will change. And it really bogs a person down. And I think that's a really shared experience. A lot of people will talk about not being able to reflect or process what has happened to them until they're able to leave. But I think there's an exception when there's uprisings, which happens every couple of years, kind of mass collective uprisings, a lot of art gets produced. When there's movements, that changes. The feeling of being trapped changes. In 2021, when the Unity Uprising was happening, a lot of art was created in basically the span of a month. People were feeling hopeful for the first time in years. People felt like we're really pushing things forward. Everyone felt really united. And it was a really difficult time. Like, a lot of lives were lost. We were going, the same street for a protest one day, and then we're carrying a body for a funeral the next day. Like, really intense loss. And it was really difficult. And yet people's emotions were better than they are on a normal day, because when things are functioning as normal and, there's no collective uprising, what's happening is that we're losing a lot and people are still dying, and, things are happening and nobody's moving, and it really crushes the soul. And people can't move every time that something happens. I mean, Palestinians have been fighting for, 70 some years, but also before that, we had the British Mandate and people were fighting against the British colonial powers. So it's been 100 years and people can't always move. But I think that movement is what helps us process and create art. I mean, we see that in these lands too, like during mass movements, you see a lot of really creative work come out. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally.
Right now in the world, there's this migrant crisis everywhere, sort of, even here in New York City, we're faced with thousands of migrants that are, either being sent here from different places in the US or who come here on their own, which is a little bit different than it's different than the Palestinian experience where, you can't leave or you can't travel places. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that and how you see it, how you see what's happening.
Yeah, I think that more and more people, as they're being displaced because of climate or conflict or anything, even economic inequality, as they're being displaced, once you lose your citizenship, it's becoming impossible to get another citizenship. Mm-hmm. And so we're just having all these stateless people. We've really exalted the idea of the nation state. The nation state is the only thing that can defend anyone's rights in the world. So if you're not a citizen of somewhere, no one is standing up for you. I mean, I'm in Ottawa, Algonquin territory, but right downtown, we have a migrant detention facility under one of the main libraries. And Canada has indefinite migrant detention, and people don't even know that we're locking up migrants indefinitely without trials, many of them. It's very similar to the administrative detention cases that we were seeing in Palestine, where people are locked up without a trial indefinitely. I think, to go back to this idea of home and belonging, and why people like me, a lot of people like me, feel like there is no reality of home. The only reason that my family ended up on these lands in Canada, so-called Canada, is because my parents were really afraid that my brother and I would be stateless. Because my father's a refugee, he's not able to give citizenship to his kids in most of the Arab world. So we lived in Syria and he wasn't able to give Syrian citizenship to us. We lived in Jordan and he wasn't able to give Jordanian citizenship, even though my mom had a Jordanian citizenship at the time. And it didn't matter where we were born. We weren't able to go to Palestine because he couldn't enter. So in the end, we came here, and it took us almost a decade, but we became citizens here. It feels like such a luck of the draw. We could have so easily stayed like so many Palestinians in those countries and grown up without citizenship, not being able to leave or travel, and not having a right to anything. I think that this is increasingly the reality for people. And at the same time, instead of opening up our borders and meeting the crisis, we're actually closing and moving away from creating safe spaces for all these people. So it is a frightening trend, like the securitization of borders. Borders are becoming more and more of like this violent thing that excludes people from basic rights. Something's going to have to change eventually, because even the people who are not thinking the same way about the migrant crisis, they're still calling it a crisis. They still recognize that something is happening that is, catastrophic for a lot of people.
Absolutely. We should wrap up with art, have a little hope. What's next for you in terms of exhibitions or shows or work, or what's planned in your future?
I do have an installation piece opening in an exhibit in Jerusalem at the end of this month, I think, or early next month. I built it right before I left in my apartment in Ramallah, and then I had it shipped to Jerusalem across the checkpoint. It was really difficult to arrange. The work is called Suspended. I painted an armchair all white. It almost looks statue-like. And then I burned hundreds of candles on it. Like, it's covered from head to toe in candles that I sat with for hours just burning. And for me, the work was about, the chair for me, the armchair, kind of looks like a throne. A lot of our furniture in Palestine has this kind of colonial-like influence. A lot of like very regal type of furniture with accented like wood accents and velvet and these, I don't really know the language of architecture or furniture design, but I hope I'm painting something of a picture, like a lot of curved edges and really regal feet to the couches and the chairs, like wooden feet that kind of curve. So it kind of looks like a throne that you can't sit on. When you look at it, the work will display without the candles burning. So it looks like it's not moving, but it's kind of, you have to imagine all these hours of burning to be able to reach a point where all these candles have burned down so much. A lot of us in Palestine are waiting for our political leadership to step down. This was part of it, this idea of leaders that are not supported by people, that are refusing to let their throne be seated on by anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it was a challenge to patriarchy even, or just this authoritarianism. Authoritarianism is really palpable in Palestine in every way. It's trickled down from the Israeli apartheid regime to the way that a lot of us treat each other. And it also is about waiting and this idea of time and waiting for a return and waiting for something to change and, just feeling like you're waiting for your entire life. So I'm excited about that. And shipping it to Jerusalem could be its own piece because it had to go through a checkpoint. So we had to make it, it's very fragile work. We had to wrap it in a certain way, but we can't wrap it in a way that it can't be seen because the soldiers have to be able to look at it when it passes the checkpoint.
Will there be some new images that you will post to your website?
Yeah, I'll put them up.
All right. And so if you want to see those images or more images of Rana's work, you can go to RANAZZAL.com.
That's right.
Yes. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. It was great to hear your voice on all of these issues and your work.
Thank you so much. It was really rich. Thank you.
It was such a pleasure. And these are the type of things I love to talk about. So anytime.
All right.
Thank you to our guest, Rana Nazzal Hamadeh, and thank you for listening.
This is International Arrivals, supporting artists from countries in conflict. You have arrived at your destination.
Bem-vindo ao Pinto Play.